The sound of iron keys turning in the lock had become as familiar to Catherine Winchester as the rising sun, a daily torment that marked another day of her captivity. Dust particles danced in the shaft of golden light that streamed through the tower's only window, illuminating her prison in the unforgiving New Mexico territory of 1876. Her wedding dress, once pristine white, now bore the marks of 3 months where its lace yellowed and hem frayed, a cruel reminder of the vows she'd never willingly spoken. "Breakfast, Mrs. Thornfield," announced Jensen, the youngest of her husband's hired men, sliding a tray of cold porridge across the floor without meeting her eyes. "Thank you," Catherine replied softly, her voice rough from disuse. "Any news from town?" Jensen hesitated, his hand lingering on the doorframe. "Not supposed to talk to you, madam. Mr. Thornfield's orders, please," she whispered, desperation creeping into her voice. "Just a word about what's happening outside these walls." The young man's face softened momentarily before hardening again. "Nothing to tell, same as yesterday." He closed the door quickly, the lock turning with a definitive click. Catherine sighed, moving to the window that overlooked the vast expanse of desert and mountains beyond. Thornfield Ranch sprawled below, the largest cattle operation in the territory and her prison for the past 3 months. Harold Thornfield had decided he wanted her for a wife, and what Harold wanted, Harold took. Her father's debts had given him the leverage he needed. The wedding had been a mockery of the sacrament. When she'd attempted to flee during the reception, Harold had dragged her to this abandoned Spanish watchtower on the edge of his property, converted into her private cell. "Until you learn to be a proper wife," he'd sneered, locking the door. Catherine placed her palm against the sun-warmed stone, wondering if anyone was still searching for her. Her father believed she'd consented to the marriage to save the family from financial ruin. Her friends had received letters forged in her hand by Harold's men speaking of her happiness in married life and desire for solitude as she adjusted to her new role. Far below, a cloud of dust on the horizon caught her attention. A lone rider approached the ranch at a gallop, silhouetted against the setting sun. Something about the rider's posture, straight-backed but relaxed in the saddle, struck her as different from Thornfield's men. Hope, that dangerous emotion she'd tried to extinguish, flickered in her chest. Yearns Calloway slowed his paint horse to a walk as he approached the sprawling Thornfield ranch. His worn leather saddlebags held everything he owned in the world, plus the letter that had brought him to this remote corner of New Mexico territory. His cousin's desperate words echoed in his mind. "Catherine never would have married that monster willingly. Something is terribly wrong." The ranch was impressive, a large main house built of adobe brick, several outbuildings, corrals filled with prime cattle, and bunkhouses for what must be dozens of cowhands. Off to the east stood an odd structure, a stone tower that looked centuries old, a relic from Spanish conquistadors, perhaps. "State your business," called a gruff voice as Yearns approached the main gate. 2 men on horseback blocked his path, rifles resting casually across their saddles. "Name's Yearns Calloway," he replied evenly, pushing back his hat to reveal his face. "Looking for work, heard Mr. Thornfield might be hiring hands for the season." The men exchanged glances. The older one, a weathered cowpoke with a scar across his chin, spoke. "Boss is particular about who he hires. Where you ride in from?" "Colorado, most recently. Been working cattle since I was tall enough to reach a stirrup." "Colorado, huh?" The scarred man studied him. "You know the Winchesters up that way." Yearns kept his expression neutral. "Big territory, can't say I've had the pleasure," the man grunted. "Follow us, foreman'll want to talk to you." They led him to a building near the main house where a broad-shouldered man with a handlebar mustache was giving orders to a group of cowboys. "Mr. Beck," called Scarface. "Got a drifter looking for work. Calls himself Yearns Calloway." Beck sized him up with sharp eyes. "We might have something." "Can you handle a rope?" "Yes, sir. Break horses. Since I was 15. Any trouble with the law I should know about?" Yearns shook his head. "None, sir." Beck nodded slowly. "We lost 2 men last month. Ranch this size always needs good hands." He gestured toward the bunkhouse. "You can put your gear in there, $1 a day plus meals. We work from sunup to sundown, Sundays off unless there's trouble. Appreciate it, Yards said, tipping his hat. Martinez will show you around, Beck said, nodding to a young Mexican cowboy. And Calloway, mister. Thornfield runs a tight operation. No drinking, no fighting, no wandering where you don't belong. Understand? Perfectly. As Martinez led him toward the bunkhouse, Yards glanced toward the stone tower. Something caught his eye, a flash of movement at the window. What's that old tower used for? He asked casually. Martinez followed his gaze and quickly looked away. Storage, old Spanish lookout, nothing important. But Yards noticed how the young man's shoulders tensed, how his voice dropped. Seems like an odd place for storage, he remarked. Mr. Thornfield doesn't like questions about his property, Martinez replied stiffly. That's the first thing you learn here. Over the next week, Yards learned much about Thornfield Ranch. He learned that Harold Thornfield was rarely present, preferring to conduct business in Santa Fe. He learned that Beck ruled with an iron fist in his employer's absence. He learned which men were true cowboys and which were more comfortable with a gun than a lasso. Most importantly, he learned about the tower. The boss's wife stays there, whispered Jeb, an older cowhand who shared the bunk next to Yards. They were sitting by the fire after dinner, the stars brilliant overhead. Supposedly she's delicate, needs isolation for her health. Seems strange, Yards commented. Most men would keep their ailing wives closer. Jeb snorted quietly. Nothing about it's right. Jensen takes her meals. Says she looks healthy as a horse, just sad. Locked door too, you figure it out. No one questions it. Thornfield owns the sheriff and half the territory, Jeb muttered. Man crossed him last year over a water rights dispute. Found him face down in the creek the next morning. Accident, they called it. And his wife, where'd she come from? Colorado family. Winchester, I think. Father owed Thornfield money. Next thing you know, there's a wedding. Day after, she's in the tower. 3 months now. Jeb tossed his cigarette into the fire. Listen, boy, don't go getting ideas. Whatever's happening there isn't our business if we want to keep breathing. But it was Yard's business. Catherine Winchester was his cousin's dearest friend, practically a sister to her. His cousin's letter had brought him hundreds of miles to find the truth. That night, he waited until the bunkhouse was filled with the sounds of sleeping men before slipping out. The moon was nearly full, casting silver light across the ranch. He kept to the shadows, making his way toward the tower. Up close, it was taller than he'd thought, rising a good 40 feet from the rocky ground. A single door at its base was secured with a heavy padlock. The only other opening was the window, about 30 feet up. As he stood contemplating the smooth stone walls, a face appeared at the window, a woman's face, pale in the moonlight. For a breathless moment, they stared at each other. Then, almost imperceptibly, she raised her hand in greeting. Yards touched the brim of his hat in response before melting back into the shadows. He had found her. Now he needed a plan. Catherine could scarcely believe what she'd seen, a stranger, studying the tower, acknowledging her presence. After months of isolation, the simple human connections sent her heart racing. Was it possible someone had come looking for her? The next morning, she watched from her window as the ranch hands went about their business. She spotted him immediately, tall and broad-shouldered, moving with the easy grace of a man comfortable on horseback. His hat shaded his features, but she could see he was younger than most of Thornfield's men, perhaps 30 or so. Throughout the day, she tracked his movements when possible. Twice she saw him glance toward the tower, though he was careful not to be obvious about it. When Jensen brought her evening meal, she decided to risk a question. I noticed a new hand working with the horses today, she said casually, accepting the tray. Tall fellow with a paint horse. Jensen hesitated. Mr. Calloway, started last week. Calloway. Catherine nearly dropped her plate. Her friend Eliza had married a Calloway 3 years ago. Where's he from? Don't rightly know, madam. Colorado, I think. Jensen shifted uncomfortably. I should go. Wait, Catherine said, lowering her voice. Jensen, you know this isn't right, what he's doing to me. The young man looked at his boots. Not my place to judge, Mrs. Thornfield. My name is Winchester, she said firmly. I was forced into this marriage against my will. I'm a prisoner here. Mr. Thornfield says you're unwell, that the isolation is for your own good. And you believe that? Catherine challenged. Have I ever seemed unwell to you, or just desperate to escape a man who locked me away when I wouldn't submit to him?" Jensen's face flushed. "Madam, I can't. I'm not asking you to free me," she said quickly. "Just, if Mr. Calloway happens to ask about me, tell him the truth of what you've seen. That's all." After Jensen left, Catherine paced her small room, hope and fear battling within her. If this Calloway was related to Eliza's husband, perhaps help had finally arrived. But Thornfield was dangerous. She'd heard enough through her window to know he wouldn't hesitate to eliminate anyone who interfered with his plans. As darkness fell, she positioned herself by the window, watching. The ranch grew quiet as the hands retired to the bunkhouse. The lights in the main house dimmed. Only the guards making their rounds disturbed the stillness. Then, a shadow separated itself from the darkness near the corral. It moved with purpose toward the tower, keeping to cover. When the figure reached the base, Catherine's breath caught. It was him, the new cowboy. He looked up, meeting her gaze directly this time. Slowly, he raised his hand, pointing first to himself, then to the tower, then making a climbing motion. Catherine nodded her understanding and watched in amazement as he began to circle the tower, examining its stone walls. The tower's exterior was mostly smooth, offering few handholds, but Yards spotted a series of narrow ledges where the mortar had deteriorated between the stones. With a silent prayer, he removed his boots, tucked them into his belt, and began to climb. It was slow, painstaking work. Twice, loose stones nearly sent him plummeting to the ground. His fingers bled as they sought purchase on the rough surface. But he continued upward, driven by the knowledge that Catherine Winchester waited above. Finally, his hand grasped the windowsill. With a supreme effort, he pulled himself up until he could see into the room. Catherine stood back from the window, her eyes wide with hope and fear. In the moonlight, she was a vision, honey blonde hair falling loose around her shoulders, her face delicate but strong. Despite the worn condition of her clothing, she carried herself with dignity. "You're Catherine Winchester," he whispered. She nodded. "Who are you, Yards Calloway?" "Your friend Eliza's husband is my cousin." He pulled himself further onto the windowsill. "She sent me to find you." Tears filled Catherine's eyes. "Thank God," she breathed. "I thought everyone had forgotten me." "Never," Yards assured her. "Eliza knew something was wrong when your letters didn't sound like you." He glanced over his shoulder at the drop below. "I'd like to continue this conversation inside, if you don't mind." Catherine stepped back as he climbed through the narrow window, landing quietly on the stone floor. Up close, she could see his features clearly: strong jaw covered in several days' stubble, straight nose, and eyes the color of a summer sky. His hands were bleeding from the climb. "You're hurt," she said, reaching for a cloth by her wash basin. "It's nothing," he replied, though he didn't refuse when she gently cleaned the cuts. "Catherine, what happened? The men say you're Thornfield's wife, but I'm not," she interrupted fiercely. "Not in any way that matters. My father owed him money. Thornfield threatened to have him imprisoned if I didn't agree to marry him. Even then, I tried to run during the wedding celebration." She gestured around the small room. "This has been my punishment ever since." Yard's expression darkened. "Has he hurt you?" Catherine understood his meaning. "No, not like that. He says he's teaching me obedience before he'll claim his marital rights." She shuddered. "He visits sometimes, tells me that when I'm ready to be a proper wife, I can leave the tower and move into the main house." "That's not going to happen," Yards said firmly. "I'm getting you out of here." "How?" "The door is locked from the outside and there are guards patrolling the grounds. Even if we got away from the ranch, Thornfield would hunt us down." "I have a plan," Yards assured her, though in truth he was still formulating one. "But I need a few days to arrange things. Can you hold on a little longer?" Catherine straightened her shoulders. "I've survived 3 months in this prison. I can manage a few more days if freedom waits at the end." "It does," he promised. "I'll come back tomorrow night if I can." Before leaving, he hesitated, then reached into his pocket and pulled out a small leather pouch. "My mother's locket," he explained, placing it in her hand. "So you know this is real, that help is coming." Catherine clutched the locket, its weight solid and reassuring in her palm. "Thank you, Mr. Calloway." "Yards," he corrected with a small smile. "Only my enemies call me Mr. Calloway." "Then thank you, Yards," she whispered, "for remembering a woman everyone else has forgotten." Their eyes held for a moment longer than necessary. Then, with practiced movements, he swung himself back onto the windowsill and began the precarious descent. Catherine watched until he disappeared into the shadows, the locket pressed against her heart. Over the next 3 nights, Yearns returned to the tower, each visit strengthening the bond between them. He brought small comforts: a book of poetry, a fresh apple, a hairbrush. More precious than these gifts was the companionship, the conversation that nourished Catherine's starved spirit. She told him about her life before the small ranch in Colorado, where she'd grown up, her dreams of teaching in a proper school someday, her father's gambling debts that had led to her current imprisonment. In turn, Yearns shared stories of his wandering life, the cattle drives from Texas to Montana, the winter he'd spent trapping in the mountains, the promise he'd made his dying mother to find a place to put down roots someday. "Why haven't you?" Catherine asked on the 3rd night, seated beside him on her narrow bed. "Found those roots, I mean." Yearns considered the question. "Never found a reason compelling enough, I suppose, or a place that felt more like home than the open trail." And now, his eyes met hers in the lamplight. "Now I'm starting to wonder if home isn't a place at all, but a person." The air between them changed, charged with something neither dared name. Catherine looked away first, a flush coloring her cheeks. "You're risking your life each time you climb this tower," she said softly. "Why would you do that for someone you barely know?" "Because it's right," he answered simply. Then, with a hint of a smile, "And because I'm starting to feel like I do know you, Catherine Winchester, better than people I've ridden with for years." On the 4th night, he arrived with news. "Thornfield returns tomorrow," he said without preamble as he climbed through the window. "We need to move tonight." Catherine's heart leaped and plummeted simultaneously. "Tonight, is everything ready as it can be?" "I've been setting things in place, supplies hidden by the creek, 2 horses waiting in a canyon 2 miles east." He took her hands in his. "It won't be easy. We'll need to travel hard and fast, stay off the main trails." "Where will we go?" "North, to start. I have friends in Colorado who'll help us after that." He shrugged. "We'll figure it out together, the word hung between them, full of promise. "What about the door?" Catherine asked practically. "It's solid oak with iron bands." Yearns grinned and pulled something from his pocket, a ring of keys. "Jensen," he explained. "Turns out he has a conscience after all." Catherine stared at the keys in amazement. "He could lose his job or worse, he knows. Said he couldn't live with himself anymore, watching you locked up like this." Yearns glanced out the window at the position of the moon. "We should wait another hour, let the ranch settle for the night, then we'll make our move." The hour passed with excruciating slowness. Catherine changed from her tattered wedding dress into the men's clothing Yearns had brought: trousers, a cotton shirt, and a woolen vest, all slightly too large but infinitely more practical for riding. She bundled her few possessions: a Bible, a photograph of her parents, and now Yearns' mother's locket into a small cloth bag. "Ready?" Yearns asked when the time came. Catherine took a deep breath, looking around the room that had been her prison for so long. "More than ready." Yearns went first, descending the circular stone staircase that wound through the tower's interior. At the bottom, he tried 3 keys before finding the one that fit the lock. The door swung open with a faint creak. Outside, the night was cool and still. Catherine inhaled deeply, her first breath of truly free air in months. They crept along the shadow of the tower's base, then darted toward the shelter of an equipment shed. "Guards patrol every 15 minutes, Yearns whispered. "We need to time this perfectly." They watched as a guard passed, rifle cradled in his arms, following the well-worn path around the main house. Once he disappeared around the corner, Yearns tugged Catherine's hand. "Now, stay low." They ran in a crouch toward the eastern edge of the property, using buildings and wagons for cover. Just as they reached the final fence line, a shout rang out behind them. "There, by the fence." "Run," Yearns commanded, boosting Catherine over the fence before vaulting it himself. Gunshots cracked through the night. Catherine felt something tug at her sleeve as they sprinted toward the darkness of the sagebrush beyond the cleared ranch land. "Are you hit?" Yearns gasped as they ran. "No, just grazed my shirt," she panted. "Keep going." Behind them, The ranch erupted into activity, lanterns flaring to life, men shouting, horses being saddled. They pushed harder, yards leading Catherine through the complex terrain with confidence despite the darkness. After 20 minutes of hard running, they reached a narrow canyon where two horses waited, tethered to a juniper tree. Catherine recognized the paint as Yard's mount. The other was a sturdy bay mare. "Can you ride astride?" Yards asked as he quickly transferred their supplies to the saddlebags. "Since I was 6, Catherine replied, already mounting the bay with practiced ease. Yards grinned as he swung into his own saddle. "I should have known, Colorado ranch girl." They rode hard through the night, following game trails and dry creek beds, avoiding the main roads where Thornfield's men would surely be searching. Catherine reveled in the sensation of freedom, the wind in her hair, the powerful movement of the horse beneath her, the vast starry sky above. By dawn, they had put nearly 20 miles between themselves and the ranch, climbing into the foothills of a mountain range to the northeast. Yards led them to a sheltered ravine with a small spring. "We'll rest here for a few hours," he said, helping Catherine dismount. Her legs trembled with exhaustion. "Thornfield's men will be searching the lowlands and main trails. We're better off lying low until nightfall." While the horses drank from the spring, Yards unpacked some provisions: jerky, hardtack, and coffee. He built a small, nearly smokeless fire in a depression between rocks and set water to boil. "Not the finest dining establishment in the territory," he apologized, handing Catherine a tin cup of strong coffee. She accepted it gratefully, warming her hands around the cup. The morning air was chilly at this elevation. "It's the best meal I've had in months," she assured him. "Freedom makes everything taste better." As the sun rose higher, they settled beneath the shade of a pine tree. Exhaustion overtook them both, and despite the danger, they dozed sitting upright, shoulders touching for warmth and comfort. Catherine woke first, disoriented momentarily until she remembered she was free. Yards slept beside her, his face relaxed in slumber, making him look younger. Gently, so as not to wake him, she reached out and brushed a lock of sandy hair from his forehead. His eyes opened at her touch, alert instantly. "Everything all right?" "Yes," she said softly. Thank you for risking everything for me." Yards sat up straighter, his gaze holding hers. "I'd do it again in a heartbeat." Something passed between them, a current of feeling neither was ready to name. Catherine looked away first, focusing on the distant mountains. "How much further to your friends in Colorado? 4 days hard riding if we're lucky." "Maybe longer if we need to avoid pursuit." Yards checked the position of the sun. "We should move soon. There's a trading post about 10 miles north where we can get more supplies." "Won't that be dangerous? Thornfield must have sent word to every outpost by now. It's run by a Ute family." No love lost between them and the cattle barons. He began saddling the horses. "Besides, we need food, and your mare could use some grain to keep her strength up." As they mounted up to continue their journey, Catherine felt a strange mixture of terror and exhilaration. She was a fugitive now, fleeing from a man who viewed her as property. Yet she had never felt more alive, more herself, than in this moment of desperate flight. The trading post was little more than a log cabin with attached stables, situated at a crossing of 2 minor trails. A weathered sign in English and Ute announced Blackfeather Trading Fair Deals. Yards approached cautiously, scanning the surroundings for signs of trouble. "Wait here," he told Catherine, who remained mounted in the shelter of some pines. "Let me make sure it's safe." He rode into the clearing, hand casually near his holstered revolver. An older Native American man emerged from the cabin, wiping his hands on a cloth. "Afternoon," Yards called, "looking to trade for some supplies." The man nodded. "Dismount and come in. Horses look tired." "They are." "Been pushing hard." Yards swung down from his saddle. "Any other travelers stop by today?" The trader's eyes narrowed slightly. 4 men early morning, looking for a man and woman, offering good money for information." Yards tensed. "Is that right?" Told them I hadn't seen anyone. The man spat into the dust. "Thornfield's men don't get help here." Relief flooded through Yards. "I appreciate that. My wife is inside. She will help with supplies." The trader nodded toward the pine trees. "Your friend can come too. No one here will betray you." Yards signaled to Catherine, who rode forward hesitantly. The trader's eyes widened slightly at her appearance, a woman in men's clothing, clearly exhausted but sitting tall in the saddle. "Come inside," the trader said. "My wife will find you proper clothes. We eat, then you rest before continuing." Inside the cabin, they were welcomed by the trader's wife, a dignified woman named Kimmy. She took one look at Catherine and ushered her behind a curtained area where she provided a simple dress, moccasins, and a chance to wash with heated water. "Thornfield bad man," Kimmy said as she helped Catherine braid her hair. "Takes what not his, land, cattle, women." She patted Catherine's shoulder. "You have brave heart." "Good man there," she added, nodding toward where Yards sat with her husband, discussing routes north. "He is," Catherine agreed softly. They rested at the trading post until evening, the trader and his wife refusing payment for the food and supplies they provided. "Consider it our fight against Thornfield," the trader said. "He pushed my brother's family off their grazing land last year." Before they departed, Kimmy pressed a small leather pouch into Catherine's hand. "Medicine," she explained, "for fever, for pain, journey long." "Thank you," Catherine said, deeply moved by the kindness of these strangers. The trader provided them with information about patrols and the safest routes north. "Stay in the high country," he advised. "Thornfield's men don't know those trails, and watch for a red rock formation shaped like a wolf's head. Turn east, their old hunting trail will lead you to a place where you can cross the river safely." Armed with fresh supplies and valuable intelligence, they set out as darkness fell. Yards led them up into the mountains, following game trails that wound through dense pine forests and across alpine meadows silver with moonlight. "You trust his directions?" Catherine asked, as they picked their way along a particularly narrow path. "Blackfeather has no reason to lie to us and every reason to want to see Thornfield's plans thwarted," Yards replied. "Besides, I've traded with him before. He's a man of honor." They rode through the night, stopping only to rest the horses and share cold rations. By dawn, they had climbed high enough that Catherine could look back and see the vast expanse of territory they had crossed, the ranch nowhere in sight. "It's beautiful," she murmured, watching the sunrise paint the landscape in gold and rose. "Yes," Yards agreed, though when she turned, she found him looking not at the view but at her. For 5 days they traveled, pushing themselves and their mounts to the limits of endurance. Twice they spotted search parties in the valleys below, but their high route kept them concealed. They crossed into Colorado territory on the 4th day, fording a swift river at the hidden crossing Blackfeather had described. The miles and days shared in danger and hardship formed a bond between them that deepened with each sunset. They learned to move together, to communicate with glances and gestures, to anticipate each other's needs. At night, they slept close for warmth, at first with awkward distance maintained, then gradually relaxing into the comfort of each other's presence. On the 6th evening, as they made camp in a sheltered grove of aspens, Yards announced, "We should reach my friend's ranch by tomorrow afternoon." Catherine looked up from tending the small fire. "Is it safe there?" "As safe as anywhere. Luke Peterson fought for the Union. Tough as they come and hates bullies. His wife Clara runs a small school for the ranch children." He smiled at Catherine. "Thought you might appreciate that, given your interest in teaching." "You remembered," she said, touched. "I remember everything you've told me." Yards sat beside her, their shoulders brushing. "Catherine, once we reach Peterson's place, we need to decide what comes next." "Next," the word hung between them, pregnant with possibility. "Thornfield will eventually find out where you are. Even if the marriage could be legally dissolved, which might be possible given the circumstances, he's not a man who forgives what he sees as an insult." Catherine stared into the flames. "What are you suggesting?" "We could keep moving. California, Oregon, even up to Canada." He hesitated. Or, she prompted when he didn't continue. Yards took a deep breath. "Or we could stay and fight. Petition the territorial courts, gather testimonies about Thornfield's business practices. There must be others he's wronged who'd stand with us." "That would be dangerous." "Very," he agreed. "But running forever has its own kind of danger." His hand found hers in the gathering darkness. "The choice is yours, Catherine. I'll support whatever you decide." She turned to face him fully, her expression resolute in the firelight. What if I don't want to choose alone? What if I want us to decide together? Together, he repeated, the word rich with meaning. I'd like that. Their eyes held in the flickering light, the connection between them palpable. Slowly, giving her every chance to pull away, Yards leaned forward until his lips met hers in a gentle kiss. Catherine responded with a sigh, her free hand coming up to rest against his chest. The kiss deepened, expressing all the emotions that had grown between them during their perilous journey: trust, admiration, and something deeper that neither had dared acknowledge. When they finally broke apart, Yards rested his forehead against hers. I never expected to find you, he whispered. When I came looking for Catherine Winchester, I thought I was fulfilling a promise to my cousin. I didn't know I was finding my own future. I was trapped in that tower for so long, Catherine replied softly. Not just physically, but in spirit. You didn't just rescue me, Yards. You reminded me who I am. They spent the night talking by the fire, making plans and sharing dreams, their hands intertwined and hearts aligned. By morning, they had decided they would not run forever, nor would they let Thornfield dictate their lives through fear. They would seek justice, but first, they would ensure Catherine's safety and legal freedom. The Peterson Ranch appeared on the horizon the following afternoon, a sprawling operation with well-maintained buildings and healthy cattle grazing in fenced pastures. As they approached, a tall man with a silver-streaked beard emerged from the main house, rifle ready but not aimed. That's close enough, he called. State your business. Luke Peterson, Yards called back. It's Yards Calloway. We met on the Goodnight-Loving Trail 3 years back. The man squinted, then lowered his rifle. Calloway, well, I'll be damned. Thought you'd be halfway to California by now. His gaze shifted to Catherine. And who's your companion? This is Catherine Winchester, Yards replied as they rode closer. We're in a bit of trouble and could use your help. Peterson's weathered face creased in a smile. Any friend of Calloway's is welcome here. Come on in. Clara's just put coffee on. Inside the comfortable ranch house, they were greeted warmly by Clara Peterson, a practical woman with kind eyes who immediately set about making Catherine feel welcome. Over a hearty meal, the first proper one Catherine had enjoyed in months, they explained their situation. Peterson's expression darkened as he listened. Thornfield, he spat. Man's reputation precedes him, even up here. Heard he's been buying up half the territory down south. And taking what he can't buy, Yards added grimly. Well, you're safe here for now, Peterson assured them. Got 15 ranch hands who know how to use rifles, and we don't take kindly to trespassers. Clara reached across the table to pat Catherine's hand. You poor dear. To be locked away like that, it's barbaric. We need to find a lawyer, Yards explained. Someone who can help us challenge the legality of the marriage given the coercion involved. Peterson nodded thoughtfully. There's a fellow in Denver who might help. Used to be a judge before he opened his practice, man of principle. I can send a rider with a message tomorrow, and in the meantime, Clara added, you'll stay here and recover your strength. She gave Catherine an appraising look. That dress is miles too big for you. I have some things that might fit better, until we can get into town for proper supplies. That night, Catherine slept in a real bed for the first time since her captivity began. The clean sheets and soft pillow felt like unimaginable luxury after weeks of rough travel and months in the tower. Yet she found herself restless, missing Yard's presence nearby. A soft knock at her door roused her from half-sleep. She wrapped a borrowed robe around herself and opened it to find Yard standing in the hallway, looking as sleepless as she felt. I couldn't rest, he admitted. Kept thinking about everything Thornfield, the legal battle ahead, you. Come in, she invited, leaving the door open as propriety demanded in the Peterson household. They sat together on the edge of the bed, close but not touching. Are you afraid? Yards asked softly. Yes, Catherine admitted, but not like before. Now it's concern about what might happen, not terror of what is happening. She looked up at him. Does that make sense? Perfect sense. His hand found hers, their fingers interlacing naturally. Catherine, I know this has all happened so fast. The escape, the journey, us. If you need time, time is the one thing Thornfield stole that I don't want back, she interrupted. He took months of my life, locked me away from everything and everyone I loved. I don't want to waste another moment being cautious about what I know in my heart." "And what do you know?" Yards asked, his voice barely above a whisper. Catherine met his gaze steadily. "That when you climbed that tower and said you're free now, you freed more than just my body. You freed my heart to recognize what it wants." She squeezed his hand. "And it wants you, Yards Calloway." The kiss they shared was different from their first, deeper, more certain, a promise rather than a question. A floorboard creaked in the hallway, reminding them of where they were. Yards pulled back reluctantly. "I should go. The Petersons have been kind enough to take us in. We shouldn't repay them by scandalizing their household." Catherine nodded, though she kept hold of his hand. "Tomorrow," she said, "we'll talk to them about our plans." "Our plans," he repeated with a smile. "I like the sound of that." The following morning over breakfast, Peterson announced that he'd sent his fastest rider to Denver with a message for the lawyer. "Should hear back within a week," he said, passing the biscuits. "In the meantime, Calloway, I could use an extra hand with the north pasture fence if you're willing." "More than willing," Yards agreed. "It's the least I can do for your hospitality." "And Catherine," Clara interjected, "I thought you might help me with the children's lessons today. Our regular teacher is down with influenza." Catherine's face lit up. "I'd be delighted." The days at the Peterson ranch fell into a pleasant rhythm. Yards worked alongside the ranch hands, earning his keep and building alliances with men who might stand with them if trouble came. Catherine assisted Clara with the small school, discovering that her dream of teaching brought her as much joy in practice as it had in theory. In the evenings, they would walk together, planning their future in cautious, hopeful conversations. On the third night, as they stood watching the sunset from a hilltop overlooking the ranch, Yards turned to Catherine with determination in his eyes. "I know our situation is complicated," he began. "We're still fighting for your freedom in the eyes of the law. Thornfield is still a threat. The future is uncertain in many ways." He took both her hands in his. "But some things I am absolutely certain about." Catherine's heart quickened. "Such as that I love you, that I want to build a life with you, wherever and however that might be possible." His voice was steady, his eyes never leaving hers. "I'm not asking for promises now, just want you to know where I stand." Tears welled in Catherine's eyes. "I stand in exactly the same place," she whispered. "I love you too, Yards. Whatever comes, we face it together." Their embrace was interrupted by the sound of hoofbeats approaching rapidly. They turned to see one of Peterson's hands riding hard toward the main house. "Something's wrong," Yards said, taking Catherine's hand as they hurried down the hill. They reached the yard just as the rider dismounted. "Mr. Peterson," he called urgently. "Riders coming from the south. Dozen men, heavily armed." Peterson emerged from the barn, wiping his hands. "Thornfield's men, can't say for certain, but they ain't looking sociable." Peterson turned to Yards and Catherine. "Get to the house. Clara has a cellar where you can hide if needed." "I won't hide," Yards said firmly. "If they've come for a fight, they'll get one. And I won't be locked away again," Catherine added, lifting her chin. Peterson studied them both, then nodded. "Your choice, but let me do the talking first." He turned to his ranch hand. "Sound the alarm. Get everyone armed and ready, but no shooting unless I give the word." Within minutes, the ranch was prepared. Men took positions near buildings and corrals, rifles at the ready but out of sight. Clara ushered the children into the root cellar while Catherine helped her gather medical supplies, just in case. Yards stood on the porch with Peterson, watching the dust cloud on the horizon grow larger. 15 of our men against 12 of theirs," Peterson muttered. "Good odds if it comes to that." "Let's hope it doesn't," Yards replied, though his hand rested on his holstered revolver. The riders approached at a steady pace, not charging but not hesitant either. As they drew closer, Yards could make out the lead figure, a tall man on a black horse, dressed in an expensive suit despite the trail dust. Harold Thornfield himself had come. The riders stopped 30 yards from the main house. Thornfield raised his hand in greeting, as casual as if he were arriving for a social call. "Peterson," he called. "Been a while." "Thornfield," Peterson acknowledged coldly, "you're a long way from your territory." "Business brings me north," Thornfield replied smoothly. His gaze shifted to Yards and Catherine. My business, specifically, you have something that belongs to me. No one here belongs to you, Peterson responded. If you're referring to Miss Winchester, she's under my protection as a free woman. Thornfield's smile didn't reach his eyes. It's Mrs. Thornfield, actually, my lawfully wedded wife, who's suffering from a nervous condition that affects her judgment. He pulled a document from his coat. I have our marriage certificate right here, signed by a proper minister and witnessed. A document signed under duress isn't worth the paper it's written on, Yards interjected, unable to remain silent, Thornfield's cold gaze fixed on him. And you are, Yards Calloway. Ah, the heroic cowboy who abducted my wife. Thornfield's voice hardened. That's a hanging offense in most places, Calloway. No one was abducted, Catherine said, stepping forward despite Yard's attempt to keep her behind him. I left of my own free will, escaping imprisonment in that tower where you kept me locked for months. Thornfield addressed her as one might speak to a child. Catherine, darling, you're confused. The isolation was for your health, as recommended by the doctor. What doctor? She challenged. There was never any doctor, only your obsession with possessing me. A flicker of genuine anger crossed Thornfield's face before he composed himself. This is precisely why I've come to take you home, my dear. You're clearly not well. She's not going anywhere with you, Yards stated, moving closer to Catherine. Thornfield sighed dramatically. I had hoped to resolve this civilly, but I see you leave me no choice. He gestured, and his men spread out in a loose semicircle, hands near their weapons. Peterson, I respect your right to protect your property, but this is a legal matter. My wife is coming with me one way or another. The tension in the yard was palpable. Peterson's men had emerged from their hiding places, firearms ready. A standoff seemed inevitable. Then a new sound broke the silence, more riders approaching from the east. Everyone turned to see three men on horseback trotting toward the ranch. The one in the lead wore a black suit and carried a leather portfolio. Gentlemen, called the suited man as he rode into the yard. I suggest everyone lower their weapons. This is now a legal proceeding, not a range war. Judge Morrison, Peterson called, relief evident in his voice. Your timing is impeccable. Got your message, Morrison replied, dismounting. Thought I'd better come in person when I heard Thornfield was involved. He nodded to the men flanking him. Brought the U.S. Marshal and his deputy just to ensure civil discourse. Thornfield's expression soured. This is a private matter, Morrison, a husband retrieving his unwell wife. So I've heard, Morrison replied dryly. He turned to Catherine. You would be Miss Winchester, I presume? Yes, sir, she answered. I've reviewed the preliminary facts of your case as outlined in Mr. Peterson's letter. Morrison removed papers from his portfolio. Most troubling, allegations of forced marriage, false imprisonment, threats against family members. He looked at Thornfield. Serious matters if proven true. Hysterical fabrications, Thornfield scoffed. I have a legal marriage certificate. A document's validity depends on the circumstances of its signing, Morrison countered. If Miss Winchester was coerced, the marriage could be declared null and void. This is absurd, Thornfield sputtered. She's my wife, that, said Morrison firmly, is for a court to decide. In the meantime, I've taken the liberty of filing an emergency injunction preventing you from approaching or attempting to remove Miss Winchester pending a full hearing. He handed the document to the marshal, who approached Thornfield. This is a legal order, the marshal explained, presenting the paper. Violation will result in your immediate arrest. Thornfield's face contorted with rage as he snatched the document. You haven't heard the last of this, he spat. I have friends in high places. So do I, Morrison replied calmly, including the territorial governor who takes a dim view of men who lock women in towers. For a tense moment, it seemed Thornfield might order his men to attack despite the legal ramifications. Then, with a cold smile, he folded the injunction and tucked it into his coat. Very well, we'll settle this in court. His gaze found Catherine. Don't get too comfortable with your rescuer, my dear. You'll be returning to the tower soon enough. With that, he wheeled his horse around and signaled his men to follow. Only when the riders had disappeared over the horizon did the tension in the yard dissipate. Peterson ordered his men to maintain watches throughout the night, just in case. Inside the house, Judge Morrison explained what would happen next. The hearing is set for 2 weeks from now in Denver. Both parties will present their case, witnesses will testify, and I'll make a ruling on the validity of the marriage. What are our chances? Yearns asked, his hand protectively covering Catherine's. Morrison considered. If Miss Winchester's account is substantiated, very good. Forced marriages aren't binding under territorial law. The imprisonment alone is grounds for annulment, possibly even criminal charges against Thornfield. He'll deny everything, Catherine said worriedly. And he has money, influence, true, Morrison acknowledged. But from what I gather, he also has enemies, people he's wronged who might be willing to testify about his character and business practices. He looked at her kindly. Justice doesn't always favor the wealthy, Miss Winchester. Sometimes it actually works as intended. That night, after the judge and marshals had departed for town, Catherine and Yearns sat on the porch swing, processing the day's events. 2 weeks, Catherine murmured. Then I might truly be free. You already are, Yearns insisted. No matter what some court decides, you're your own woman now. She leaned against his shoulder. I know, but I want it official so we can start our life together without looking over our shoulders. Our life together, Yearns repeated softly. I like how that sounds. So do I, Catherine hesitated. Yearns, if the court rules in my favor, would you consider staying here, not just for me, she added quickly. The Petersons mentioned they need a new foreman. Clara says there's demand for a proper school. You want to settle here? Yearns asked, surprised. After everything that's happened in this territory. Not because of the place, she explained. Because of the people. The Petersons, Judge Morrison, even the Blackfeathers, they stood with us when it mattered. That's worth something. Yearns was quiet for a moment, considering. All my life, I've been moving from place to place, never settling long enough to put down those roots my mother wanted for me. He turned to face her. But home isn't just a place. It's where you build something that matters with people who matter. Is that a yes? Catherine asked, hope illuminating her features. Instead of answering directly, Yearns reached into his pocket and withdrew a small object, a simple silver ring with a turquoise stone. Bought this from Kimmy Blackfeather while you were changing, he admitted. Wasn't sure when the right moment would be to offer it. Catherine's breath caught. Yearns, I'm not proposing marriage right this minute, he clarified. Seems wrong when we're still fighting to free you from one you didn't choose, but I am proposing a promise. He held out the ring. A promise that when you're legally free, when you're ready, I'll be here. Ready to build that home with you, wherever you want it to be. Tears spilled down Catherine's cheeks as she extended her hand. I accept your promise, she whispered as he slipped the ring onto her finger. And I make one in return to love you, Yearns Calloway, come what may. Their kiss sealed the promise, witnessed only by the stars above and the distant howl of a coyote welcoming the night. The 2 weeks before the hearing passed in a flurry of preparation. Judge Morrison worked with Catherine to document her ordeal in detail. Yearns rode with Peterson to gather testimonies from others who had experienced Thornfield's ruthless business tactics. Clara helped Catherine select appropriate clothing for court, while also discussing plans for the school they hoped to establish. 3 days before the hearing, an unexpected visitor arrived at the ranch. Jensen, the young cowhand who had helped Catherine escape. Mr. Thornfield fired me, he explained as he sat nervously at the kitchen table. Said he couldn't trust me after what happened. He looked at Catherine. I came to testify about the tower, about how you were kept locked up. That's very brave, Catherine said, deeply moved. He could make trouble for you, Jensen shrugged. Already has, but some things are worth standing up for, madam. His testimony wasn't the only surprise. As word spread about the upcoming hearing, others came forward. A shopkeeper Thornfield had muscled out of business, a widow whose water rights he'd stolen, 3 ranch hands who'd witnessed his violent temper firsthand. People have been afraid of him for too long, Peterson observed as another witness arrived. Your case has given them courage to speak out. The morning of the hearing dawned clear and cool. Catherine dressed carefully in a borrowed blue dress that Clara had altered to fit her slender frame. As she arranged her hair, Yearns knocked on her bedroom door. May I come in? He called. Of course, she replied, securing the final pin. He entered, freshly shaved and wearing a clean shirt under his best vest. His eyes widened appreciatively at her appearance. "You look beautiful," he said simply. "And you look very handsome," she returned, smoothing his collar. "Ready for this, as ready as I'll ever be for a courtroom." He took her hands. "No matter what happens today, remember that you're free. We found each other, and nothing Thornfield or any judge says can change that." Catherine squeezed his hands. "I know, but I still want to win," he grinned. "That's my girl." The Denver courthouse was imposing, a solid brick building with high ceilings and polished wooden benches. By the time they arrived, the gallery was already filling with spectators. News of the case had spread throughout the region, drawing curiosity seekers and supporters alike. Thornfield sat at the plaintiff's table, flanked by two expensive-looking lawyers. He wore an immaculate suit and an expression of confident superiority. When Catherine entered, he favored her with a cold smile that sent shivers down her spine. Judge Morrison presided, his manner formal but fair as he called the extraordinary hearing to order. "We are here to determine the validity of a marriage between Harold Thornfield and Catherine Winchester, now contested on grounds of coercion and duress," he announced. "We will hear evidence from both parties before rendering a decision." Thornfield's lawyers presented their case, first producing the marriage certificate, letters supposedly written by Catherine, but which she knew were forgeries, and testimony from a doctor who claimed to have recommended isolation for her nervous condition. When it was their turn, Catherine took the stand. With clear, unwavering voice, she recounted the whole story: her father's debts, Thornfield's ultimatum, the mockery of a wedding, and her 3-month imprisonment in the Tower. "Miss Winchester," Thornfield's lawyer asked during cross-examination, "if you were truly imprisoned, how did you manage to escape?" Catherine's gaze found Yards in the gallery. "A brave man climbed the tower and told me I was free. For the first time in months, someone saw me as a person, not property." One by one, their witnesses testified, Jensen describing the locked door and Catherine's obvious distress, the Blackfeathers recounting Thornfield's men searching for fugitives, and several others detailing Thornfield's pattern of intimidation and violence. Yards was the final witness, explaining how he'd come to New Mexico territory at the request of Catherine's friend, concerned by the uncharacteristic letters she'd received. "And what did you find when you located Miss Winchester?" Morrison asked. "A prisoner," Yards replied firmly. "A woman locked in a stone tower against her will, wearing the tattered remains of a wedding dress she'd been forced into 3 months earlier." "Your Honor," Thornfield's lawyer interjected, "Mr. Calloway's testimony is clearly biased. He has developed romantic feelings for the plaintiff's wife." "That's true," Yards acknowledged without hesitation. "I have come to love Catherine Winchester, but I loved truth and justice before I ever met her, and what was happening in that tower was neither." As the testimonies concluded, Judge Morrison called both parties forward. "I've heard sufficient evidence to render a decision," he announced. "Based on the preponderance of testimony, I find that the marriage between Harold Thornfield and Catherine Winchester was conducted under duress and is therefore null and void." A murmur ran through the courtroom. Catherine closed her eyes briefly, relief washing over her. "Furthermore," Morrison continued, "I am forwarding evidence of false imprisonment to the territorial prosecutor for potential criminal charges." He fixed Thornfield with a stern gaze. "Mr. Thornfield, this court orders you to maintain a distance of no less than 500 yards from Miss Winchester henceforth. Violation of this order will result in your immediate arrest." Thornfield's face contorted with rage. "This is an outrage. You haven't heard the last of this matter." "On the contrary," Morrison replied calmly, "I believe we have. Court adjourned." The gallery erupted in cheers as Morrison banged his gavel. Catherine found herself surrounded by well-wishers Clara and Luke Peterson, the Blackfeathers, Jensen, and others who had stood with them. But her eyes sought only one person. She found Yards waiting patiently at the edge of the crowd, his face radiant with joy. When their eyes met, he moved toward her as if drawn by an invisible force. "You're free now," he said when he reached her, echoing the words he'd spoken in the tower. "Truly free." "Yes," she agreed, taking his hands, "free to choose my own future." She looked up at him with shining eyes. "And I choose you, Yards Calloway." Their embrace was interrupted by Peterson clapping Yards on the shoulder. "Time for celebrating later, you two. Let's get back to the ranch before Thornfield thinks up some new mischief." They rode back to the Peterson ranch in high spirits, surrounded by friends who had become like family. The future stretched before them, bright with possibility. That evening, as sunset painted the Colorado sky in shades of gold and crimson, Yards and Catherine stood together on the same hilltop where they had confessed their love weeks earlier. "So," Yards said, his arm around her waist, "what happens now, Catherine Winchester?" She smiled up at him. "Now we build that life we've been talking about. Peterson offered you the foreman position this morning, didn't he?" "He did," Yards confirmed. "And Clara mentioned the school board is meeting next week to discuss your teaching proposal. Then it seems we have a place to start." Catherine turned to face him fully. "But there's something else I want first." "Name it," he said, his eyes tender. "That promise you made," she reminded him, touching the turquoise ring she still wore. "I'm legally free now, I'm ready if you are," understanding dawned in Yards' expression. Slowly, reverently, he knelt before her, taking her hand in his. "Catherine Winchester, from the moment I saw you in that tower window, something in me recognized you not just as the woman I'd been sent to find, but as the woman I'd been searching for my whole life without knowing it." His voice, usually so steady, trembled slightly with emotion. "Will you marry me, build a home with me, grow old with me?" "Yes," she answered without hesitation, tears of joy spilling down her cheeks. "Yes to all of it, Yards Calloway." As he rose to seal their engagement with a kiss, Catherine reflected on the journey that had brought them to this moment. From imprisonment to freedom, from isolation to connection, from fear to love. The tower that had been her prison now existed only in memory, its shadow growing fainter with each passing day. In its place stood something stronger, the foundation of a life built on choice, courage, and love freely given. They were married a month later, in a simple ceremony on the Peterson ranch. Clara had helped Catherine sew a new wedding dress, ivory cotton trimmed with lace nothing like the elaborate gown Thornfield had forced upon her. Judge Morrison officiated with the Petersons, the Blackfeathers, and all who had helped them standing witness. As they spoke their vows beneath an arch of wildflowers, Catherine looked into Yard's eyes and saw not just her rescuer or protector, but her partner, the man who had climbed a tower and offered freedom, then stayed to build a life of shared dreams. "I take you, Catherine Winchester, to be my lawfully wedded wife," Yards pledged, his voice strong and clear. "To have and to hold from this day forward. I promise to stand beside you, not above you or before you, to support your dreams as you have supported mine. To build our home wherever life takes us, knowing that home is wherever we are together." Catherine's voice shook slightly as she responded, "I take you, Yards Calloway, to be my lawfully wedded husband. I promise to live each day in the freedom of our love, to face whatever challenges come our way with the same courage that brought us together. To remind you, as you reminded me, that we are never truly imprisoned while we have each other." Judge Morrison pronounced them husband and wife with evident satisfaction. "What freedom and justice have joined together," he declared, adapting the traditional words, "let no man put asunder." The celebration lasted well into the night, with music and dancing under the stars. As Yards swept Catherine into a waltz, he whispered, "Happy Mrs. Calloway, happier than I ever dreamed possible," she answered, her head resting briefly against his shoulder. "And you, I found my roots," he said simply. "Right here with you." In the years that followed, they built the life they had envisioned together. Yards became not just the Peterson ranch foreman, but eventually a partner in the operation. Catherine established the region's first proper school, teaching children from surrounding ranches and the nearby town. They faced challenges, of course. Thornfield made one last attempt to cause trouble, hiring men to burn the schoolhouse during its construction. But the community rallied, rebuilding it stronger than before, and Thornfield finally faced justice for his many crimes when former victims found the courage to testify against him. 2 years after their wedding, Catherine gave birth to their first child, a daughter they named Hope, for what had sustained them through their darkest hours. A son, Daniel, followed 3 years later. Their home, a comfortable cabin on Peterson land that Yards had built with his own hands, rang with laughter and love. On their 5th wedding anniversary, Yards surprised Catherine with a special gift, the deed to a plot of land adjacent to the Peterson ranch, with a stream running through a meadow surrounded by aspen trees. "Our own place," he explained as they stood on the hillside overlooking it, "if you want it." Catherine surveyed the land, imagining the home they could build there, the garden she would plant, the trees their children would climb. "It's perfect," she said, leaning into his embrace. "But you know what I've learned." "What's that?" he asked, pressing a kiss to her temple. "Home isn't just where we build our house," she said thoughtfully. "It's where we choose to be ourselves, freely and completely. You gave me that gift long before we had land or a house, the day you climbed that tower and said those 3 words that changed everything." "You're free now," Yards recalled softly. "And I choose every day to use that freedom to love you," Catherine said, turning in his arms to face him. "Happy anniversary, my love." As the sun set behind the mountains, painting the Colorado sky in the same golden hues as on the day of their engagement, they sealed their continuing promise with a kiss no longer the desperate connection of fugitives or the tentative exploration of new lovers, but the deep, abiding affirmation of 2 people who had found in each other both freedom and home. In the distance, the silhouette of a tower appeared briefly in Catherine's memory, then dissolved into the beauty of the present moment where she stood on her own land, in her own choice, with the man who had taught her that true freedom begins with love.